What's up, y'all? It's now time for some monkey physics. Something that you humans have made up, that you think you're onto something, and really you're not. It's some bullshit. And I'm going to tell you why. Simple as this. Look, let's start with the diagrams. Let's see. See this top one? What is multiplication? X times Y is a summation from I equals 1 to I equals Y of X I. So that means you add X to itself Y amount of times. Right? So that means that Y has to be a instruction. It's a numerical instruction. X can have units, but Y can't. Because it's just a mathematical instruction. And when you're adding something to itself, the end result will only be in the same units as itself. If you have 10 kilograms and you add 10 kilograms, you end up with 20 kilograms. Now, where you run into problems is if you try to add two things that don't have the same units. 10 degrees Celsius plus 10 kilograms is nothing sensible. It doesn't equate into anything. Now, so if multiplication is just repeated addition, and addition requires the same units, then therefore things like force equals mass times acceleration cannot exist. Mass is in kilograms. Acceleration's in meters per second per second. You cannot multiply the two because of the fact that you can't add a certain mass to itself a certain number of meters per second times. Now, another way to visualize this is just look at other units, and it makes clear sense. 3 oranges times 1 apple. 3 oranges times 1 apple. 3 oranges times 1 apple equals nothing. It doesn't equal 3 apple times oranges because those don't exist. You see, once you multiply the units of unlike things, you end up with nothingness. In fact, you can't even multiply the units if they're the same. Like 10 kilograms times 10 kilograms does not equal 100 kilograms squared. There's no such thing as a kilogram squared. The only time or exception to that is with lengths, and that's only because we use the Cartesian units. So because of the fact that we use the Cartesian coordinate system, everything is estimated in cubes. If you have an X, Y, and Z axis, then you have square cubes in which we're using to estimate the volume of things. And for that reason, we get the relation that length times length equals an area times the length equals the volume. But that's only because we're using the rectangular Cartesian coordinate system. Now, other than that, no units can be multiplied. You can't have a kilogram squared. You can't have a degree Kelvin squared. None of that makes any sense. But in physics, they like to tell you that F equals ma. Right? Like you can take a mass and multiply it by an acceleration, and it actually results in a force. How? Show me the mass, and how do you multiply it by an acceleration? Now, if you want to say that it's because they're proportional, well, a proportion of something, like if you have half of a pie, I mean like a literal pie, not 3.14, I mean a pie. If you have half a pie, the proportion is 1/2 of a pie. You end up with a pie. A half a pie, right? But, or you can expand it, say like 3 times a pie equals 3 pies, right? So you're increasing or decreasing the amount of the united value by a certain proportion. That's all proportionality can do. You can't increase a mass by the proportion of an acceleration and then the end result not being a mass, but rather, or not being a proportion of a mass, but rather being a force of some sort. How does it become a force all of a sudden? How did you even multiply a mass times an acceleration? That's the same thing as asking, how did you multiply 3 oranges times 1 apple? What's the end result? What does it look like? It's 3 orange times apples. What's an orange times apple? What does it look like? Have you seen one? No, they don't exist. And you can do that with any types of units that you try to multiply like that. They don't exist. 3 oranges times 3 oranges is not 9 orange squareds. Show me an orange squared. What does that look like? Nothing. You cannot do that. And you can't just pick and choose along the way which ones are acceptable and which ones are not acceptable just because you want to, because in physics, they're like, this one has a useful meaning. It doesn't matter. It's either all of them don't work or or all of them do work. You know, you can't just pick and choose when it's convenient for you, which leads me to my next point. Anytime you multiply anything in physics with units, the resulting thing that you get is made up. If force equals ma, then force is made up. It's not a real life thing. Just like an apple times orange is not a real life thing. Force is not a real life thing. The fact that they have some scale of measurement and then they labeled that a Newton and then tell you that yeah, that's what force is, does not mean that multiplying a mass times an acceleration results in that. That's an illegal operation. You cannot do that. Also, things like when I was talking about picking and choosing at your convenience, things even worse than that are constants. The gravitational constant, 6.66 times 10 to the negative 11th meters cubed divided by kilograms times seconds squared. That is complete nonsense. There's nothing in the real world that is measured in meters cubed divided by kilograms times seconds squared. That's complete nonsense. But what they use that gravitational constant for is because their two equations don't equate or aren't right. And instead of admitting that, oh no, these two equalities are not the same, they then add a fudge factor, the gravitational constant, that cancels all the units out conveniently, making it perfect to equate to the other side of the equation. You can't just do that. How many times on a math problem do you get it wrong, and then you can just times it by a constant that you made up that cancels all the units and makes it the correct value? You can't. And even if you do, that constant doesn't exist in reality just because your math is bad and you needed to correct it. So there's no gravitational constant in reality. There's none of that. It's all utter nonsense. So just think about that. You can't multiply united values except for lengths, and only up to 3. 3 times, lengths times lengths times lengths is a volume. That's it. There's no other time where you can multiply units. Now, what you can do is you can divide units, but it's not necessarily that you're dividing them. More so, you're calculating a rate. So you're saying this many miles changed in this many seconds. So, or let's say hours. So you have miles per hour, right? And it's just a ratio. It's just saying in the same instance that this many miles were displaced, this many seconds were displaced in that same instance. So you have an average value by stating it in miles per hour. You can do that with unit values. You can find a rate by dividing them and getting a ratio. But the end unit is just telling you how many of one unit changes at the same instance that the other units change, and how many of them. And then you're just calculating the average rate in which they changed along that way. But you can't have miles times hours. How many miles times hours does that equate to? Nothing. There's nothing in reality that is in miles times hours. All right? So rates are okay, but multiplying is not. The only thing you can multiply with united values is if you have a united value times a pure number. So if you have 3 times 1 orange, right here, 3 times 1 orange, you have 3 oranges. That's a numerical value of proportion times orange, which is the unit, equals 3 oranges. And it all has to do with the fact that multiplication is repeated addition, and addition can only happen with like united things. So I don't know where physics goes off thinking, oh, let's just name a force, mass times acceleration, and the units that don't make any sense or have no applicable value in reality, we'll just call it a Newton. Okay, well, if that's the case, then I want to name my own unit. It's a mass times a degree Kelvin, and we're going to call that a V, or a void. We'll call it a void. Okay, do I get to do that? Why not? You're telling me there's no mass times degree Kelvin? Because it doesn't make sense, but mass times acceleration makes sense? Because you want it to? No. So either give me my unit or realize that you can't pick and choose. They're either all correct or they're all wrong. Math doesn't just pick and choose. It's only correct sometimes. That it's convenient for us, but it's not correct when you want to multiply units like mass times degree Kelvin. Math is absolute and not there for, use of convenience whenever it fits our agenda or whatever. So there you have it.